All right. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us. We'll get started in just a couple of minutes, just waiting for everyone to join. Thanks, everyone is already here. I'll just give you a couple of minutes. See some familiar names, which is always nice. And we're enabling captions. Right. Well, we'll get started with the introduction. Thanks again for joining us, everyone, to this webinar on localizing the publishing experience. My name is Romy Beard. I'm Head of Publisher Relations here at Chronos Hub, which is a workflow platform for publishers, institutions, and funders. And I've been running these kind of panel cross-industry webinars for the last couple of years. And the goal is to discuss various topics related to scholarly communications, academic publishing, and I always try and look for like a bit of a mix of different perspectives. And what we'll talk about today is author experience, but localizing the author experience, the publishing experience. So we'll talk both about what that's like in terms of publishing, not in English language, but in different languages, but also the experience that you might have when interacting with platforms, and what benefit of localizing, translating different elements of that author experience, such as emails, buttons on a platform, might be like for non-English speaking researchers and authors. So I'm joined today by my colleague Jan Railovic, who's a business development consultant, and he'll do a brief introduction to himself as well. But before I hand it over, I'd like to quickly go over the different speakers that we have and the format that we're covering today. So we've got 4 exciting speakers. We've got Avi Steinman from Academic Language Experts. We've had in a webinar before last year, so thanks for joining me again, Avi. Then we'll have a joint presentation from Vivian Bachelet and Soumya Mahadevan. I hope I said that properly. From Medwave and Queer Docs, who'll be presenting together to talk about their bilingual endeavor in Spanish and English publishing. And last but not least, Metin Tank from Istanbul University Press. So they'll each be presenting for about 5 minutes, and then we'll move on to a group discussion to talk about some of the common themes and the common topics, and no doubt also questions from yourselves. So please put those in the Q&A. We'll get to them as we can, as we see fit, and feel free to pop some thoughts in the chat as well. Jan, do you want to start us off quickly before we hand over to Avi? Some thoughts from you?
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, everyone, and welcome, and thanks, Romy, also for hosting and organizing this webinar. Yeah, and I work as business development consultant, as Romy said, with Chronos Hub, and I have previously worked in different roles for a variety of publishers in international settings in the Middle East, where I was based for 5 years, and in India, where I was based for a year. So while I worked there, I have often seen the need for authors to overcome various barriers to making their work, having their work accepted, whether these are language barriers, cultural barriers, all sorts of barriers. And we have always tried to implement support structures, whether that's translating parts of web infrastructure or elements of metadata, just to create more accessibility. But it sort of always felt like scratching the surface. It always felt like an ongoing journey, and that a lot more needs to be done. And for me personally, I'm also a German native, so I'm also not a native English speaker. I always felt that not enough was done to really take into account a second language learner's perspective, maybe at school level, in textbooks here and there, sort of piecemeal, but certainly not in any concerted way. So I think that's an ongoing discussion, and now we have new technologies, new AI tools that maybe are able to eradicate some of these barriers, provide new solutions, and maybe create something that is really, universe that works for everyone. And I'm sure there are also sort of darker sides to that. What happens if there's a huge scale of new English outputs coming on the market? Can scholarly infrastructure handle all that? So I think that there are many sides to this as well. So I'm just really looking forward to hearing everyone's perspective, and I'll have my further questions as we go along.
Thanks, Jan. And I forgot to say this. There's actually none of us presenting, moderating here, native English speakers. I'm originally from Luxembourg, so I grew up in a very multilingual setting, but yet we all communicate in English as the common language. So that is, the language that will give you, most visibility internationally. But obviously there's the, challenge of wanting to publish in your local language to impact your local community that might not have access otherwise. So it's a bit of a balance. And we've got quite a variety of locations from India to Istanbul, Israel, Chile, the UK. So quite multilingual here today, or multicultural rather. So thanks for that intro, and I'll hand over to Avi to get us started. Thanks so much.
Thanks so much, Romy. Romy, I was totally convinced that you're Irish, so I've learned something new already today. I don't know. I felt like it was so obvious that I didn't even ask you. So there you go. I learned something new.
I live in Scotland, so I, have
Okay,
a
or
Scottish
maybe Scottish.
accent,
Fine,
but
fair enough. Got it. Okay, that makes sense. Am I able to quickly just share one screenshot that's not in the presentation, or is that not possible?
You should be able to. I was hoping to avoid, kind of cross
Yeah, of
sharing
course, of
traffic.
course.
So,
There's just one thing that I feel kind of that I always like to show when we talk about localization. It's just a kind of starting point. This was an attempt at localization gone wrong. Okay, and if anyone's familiar with the dating app Grindr, so they tried to come up with a app called Kinder, or a spin-off of that app, which was going to be a nicer, more safer place to play. And for any German speakers in the room, you know that it ended up coming off as Kinder, which in German means children, and had implications that were really quite horrific for the for the for the company. So I just and yeah, so I can stop sharing now, and I'll get back to you, Romy. But just wanted to kind of, as a kickoff, I think it's important. We're going to talk about a lot of the potential opportunities in localization. I'm a big believer in localization, but it's important to do it professionally, do it properly, because you definitely don't want to end up like Grindr, who's have a PR nightmare and mess. So as Romy said, I'm the founder and CEO of Academic Language Experts. Our mission is to help researchers for whom English is a second language to publish their research. And we like to see ourselves as bridging the gap between the researchers on the one hand and the publishers on the other hand. So I want to talk a little bit about how we can harness actually the power of AI. And I know that a lot of people, there's probably a big spectrum of ideas and thoughts on what AI can do, what it can't do, strengths, weaknesses. I want to focus specifically for the next few minutes on how AI can actually be a tremendous, leveler in terms of equality between English native speakers and non-native English speakers. And actually, if we think about it, right, all of these new tools that are coming out, they're large language models. And I always put the emphasis on the language, right? They are actually, what they're doing is they are understanding a deep understanding of words, not necessarily of facts, right? That's where we get frustrated when we start trying to ask factual questions. But as editors, as translators, as style as summarizers, they can do really wonderful work. All right, Romy. Okay. Oh, so just a bit about me. Yeah. So in addition to running Academic Language Experts, I also run SciWriter AI, which is a startup to help researchers with as a co-pilot to help using AI to help them with drafting and editing and revising their research. I'm also a core member of Kangaroo. So Kangaroo is a consortium of different publishers, researchers, research institutions, funders who are trying to create policy that is for responsible and proper use of artificial intelligence within the research community. All right. So in order to get this conversation kicked off, I want to tell you a quick story about Professor Tu Youyou. And I'm curious if anyone here has come across her name before. She is one of the unsung heroes of science in the 21st century, yet for some reason she's very not well known whatsoever. So Professor Youyou was a professor at the Chinese Academy of Natural Sciences in the 1970s and 80s. And she was studying natural medicine, natural sciences, and she came across this natural compound called artemisinin. And she quickly discovered that this could actually be used as a to cure malaria. I mean, it's really quite incredible. At the time, malaria was killing millions of people every year, mainly in Africa, but around the world. And she basically solved it, right? She basically came up with the cure. But for whatever reason, and I'd love, if I ever meet her, I will ask her, but for whatever reason, she only published her research in Chinese. Now, I don't know why she only published her research in Chinese. It could be that she was incentivized to do so. It could be that, she felt more comfortable. She didn't have the tools or the skills. Maybe she didn't have the funding to localize or to translate her research into Chinese. Into English. Maybe she didn't feel comfortable with with the user systems that were in place and the publisher, and maybe she tried, but she failed. It doesn't really matter what the actual story is. I think these are all realistic possibilities and things that have happened to other researchers that have groundbreaking research. But in this case, it had real world ramifications. So what I mean by that is that it took 4 or 5 years until an American researcher who was doing a systematic review came along and said, oh my God, this woman, cured malaria and no one knows. I mean, we're talking about, and it's one thing if scientists don't know, even the pharma companies don't know, right? And they had billions of dollars to make off knowing this. And after that systematic review was published, we know that kind of changed everything because Professor Yu's article had never been cited or had been cited once or twice, and this article has since been cited thousands of times. So thankfully, we were able to better late than never, as they say. But I think that the lesson here is what it's not just that we're trying to help these researchers out. It's actually that we're missing out on potentially life-saving research when we don't localize our systems. And I think that's kind of the take-home message that I always like to think about and to keep in mind. Okay, so how bad is the problem? And this is a graphic that was taken from an article in PLOS. Some of you may have seen this article. I think it came out already about 1.5 to 2 years ago about what are those hurdles, that we need to overcome in order to get to publication. And those hurdles are quite significant. And maybe each individual one we can kind of brush away, but in total, I think show a picture of what it means to be a non-native English speaker and how much more difficult it is for them to succeed in the world of academic publishing. So, just a few highlights here. It takes 91% more time to read, 51% more time to write. Their papers, even once they write and once they need to pay a lot more for editing. They're rejected a lot more because of language issues. I've seen a lot of talk on LinkedIn recently about this. Please get a native English speaker to review your work, and people starting to kind of push back against that. It takes them a long time to revise their papers. And if you add up kind of the sum total, if you think about how many articles, a researcher is preparing over their career, and you add this up, it's, first of all, it's taxpayer money that's not being, put to good use. And it's also, we're missing out on good research. And it really does, it kind of explains to us why the research can tend to be biased more towards Anglo-centric countries. So the question that I think myself and really researchers have been asking is AI the antidote, right? Is this the way to kind of overcome or address some of these issues in a serious and meaningful way? So I'm a big fan of a new survey that just came out a couple months ago from Oxford University Press. If you haven't had the chance to read it, I do highly encourage you to do so. I'll try and drop it in the notes once I'm done speaking, but you can just Google, Oxford University Press author AI survey. And there's some really fascinating findings there. This follows up on surveys that have been done previously by De Gruyter and Springer Nature, which also were important. But I think this one is the most up to date and reflects, maybe I'm biased, but it reflects kind of what I'm seeing in the field, working with researchers as well. And across the surveys, the number one thing that continually comes up in terms of the potential efficiency gains by using, with AI, researchers are turning towards language. So what that means is a number of things. It means that they're writing their research in their native language and they're using these AI tools to translate it. It means they're writing in English and they're editing and reviewing and revising their research. I mean, it means that they're using it also, to improve their style or academic writing flow. And I think that it behooves us not just to, I think there's two ways to go about it as publishers. One is a question of policy, right? What do we allow? What do we not allow? How do we try and, is there a way to enforce what we think we should be allowing or not allowing? That's question number one. And then question number two is, do we actually want to take another step forward and actually help maybe provide some of these services or enable some, our authors to use these services, right? And use it as an opportunity to create a value add within the publishing workflow. So imagine again, if you're the publisher that instead of is always rejecting all the time for language, is the one that's become an enabler because you've presented potentially, integrated a language solution. And I know, for example, a good example of this is I know that ACS has been working really hard with Rightful, the AI editing company, where they've been training on all of the ACS data so that they, kind of Rightful can become experts at chemistry writing. And all of a sudden, if I'm an author and I'm debating between a few different places, and this place is actually, not only is it not going to reject me for language, but it's going to give me a language tool for free or for, almost free, that can help me improve my writing, well, then all of a sudden that might be, a reason to choose that publisher over other publishers that I might be debating. And I think, we tend to get, when we talk about AI, the conversations around AI and artificial intelligence tend to be centered around, I like ChatGPT or I don't like ChatGPT. And I think that it's important for us to move beyond that conversation and realize there's actually a very wide, a lot of tools that are being built, even within, the language space. There are language tools. There are tools that are being built for authors that are trained on the academic record. The major author services companies are building these tools. And I think that it's important for us to kind of, do a little bit of a deep dive and understand which AI tools are out there. And again, one of two things: either to create policy, which hopefully is, what I would say is open towards ESL authors using some of these tools, if not trying to include some of these tools into our own internal workflows. Okay, I think I think we can kind of cut it off there, Romy. There's plenty more to be said about, kind of these tools and how they work. But I think that like the take home that's important for me to give over is just this idea of, large language models. We need to understand that, part of the frustration around AI, right? When misinformation and hallucination comes when we try to use it as an information model, as an information source. And that's when we get frustrated. But if we stop looking at it that way and we start looking at it more as an artist, less as a technology, but more as an artist and more as a language tool, then I think we can harness the power of those artificial intelligence systems in order to really help our research audience and our authors to have the best experience. And I'm sure Romy will sign off that author experience is going to be the name of the game going forward. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks, Avi. Yeah, I really like this example as well. That explains that it's a predictive model, right? It just predicts the next word that it's likely going to be. It's not actually going to invent anything new, but it's just that kind of language sequence.
Yeah, anyone who plays Wordle, like if you want to understand what large language models are doing, they're essentially playing Wordle, which is why. So what that means is the more information they get, the better we prompt it, actually, the better the output that we get it. So I meet a lot of publishing folks who are like, I tried ChatGPT, it gave me an answer I don't like, I turned it off, right? And it's like, my response to them is always, well, take yourself back to that day and time where you first tried the internet. You had to wait 10 minutes for the modem to call up. The page loaded at it took 10 minutes for a page to load. I also would have said that day, like, oh, forget this internet, nonsense. This is never going to be anything. But I think we need to keep in mind, this is the worst that AI will ever be, right? It'll only improve over time. And if we know how to use it, right, if we're not trying to use it as a hammer to bake a cake, but rather we understand that it's a blank canvas, right? And it's an artist, and we don't necessarily know what's going to come out, but we use it, we can harness the power of it creatively, then I think we can really use it for good.
Thanks, Avi.
Pleasure.
And we'll jump straight on to our next presenters, Vivian, Bashley, and Soumya. Over to you.
Thank you so much. And I think that was a great segue. I really enjoyed what Avi was talking about. It's all around the author experience. It is around harnessing AI. But it is also about the importance of publishing in the local language along with publishing in English. And I think that's is what Vivian and I are going to try to do, is to actually present an actual case study of how the collaboration between CreaDocs and Medwave solved one of the problems that we were having with respect to localization, right? But Vivian was having with respect to localization. But I think the story about that lost science, the lost opportunity with science not getting published in English, and if it's only published in the local language, I think is pretty much the problem that Vivian had when she approached us, right, Vivian? So just as a way of introduction, I'm Soumya Mahadevan. I'm the Chief Operating Officer for CreaDocs. And we are a unified publishing ecosystem going all the way from submission to production. And if I can say, the one mission that we have is to make publishing as easy as clicking a single button. Vivian, if you want to introduce yourself.
Yes, my name is Vivian Bashley. I am a medical doctor and a master's in clinical epidemiology. I founded Medwave in 2001 as an online learning resource, e-learning resource, and then it devolved into a peer-reviewed indexed journal as of 2010 on. And it's a general medical journal. We're doing quite well. We cater to the Latin American region, but it's an international journal. I work in the University of Santiago of Chile as evidence-based EBM professor, and I am also a researcher.
Maybe if you could move to the next slide, yeah.
So this I already mentioned. Initially, we set up Medwave to harness the power of the internet in a country so geographically diverse as Chile. You may remember, Chile is a veritable spaghetti. It covers a whole bunch of different climates. And so getting around in our country is tough and expensive. It's quite an extreme nature. And we have doctors working all over the place, especially in rural areas. When they come out of the university, they have to go out and work for 5-6 years anywhere. And so internet was a great opportunity to keep them updated. And then, so geography and different realities and settings was something that was sort of in our DNA as our mission. And then we evolved into a peer-reviewed journal. And of course, we broadened our scope to all of Latin America. And that's when, while we were initially publishing only in Spanish, but by 2013, 14, we made the decision that we had to publish bilingually. And that was a long story. We published that, but it's we didn't have the solution in the beginning, but we now, and with this South-South collaboration with CreaDocs, we have been able to develop something that integrates the technical things that we do to put out our journal now bilingually on a platform, a technological support platform.
Yeah, so I think, and I introduced myself, but the interesting story is Vivian actually came across CreaDocs because she was an author at the BMJ, and she had published her articles with the BMJ, and BMJ uses CreaDocs. And she liked the author experience with CreaDocs, and she had approached us to help solve this particular problem of, how do you make sure that the Spanish version of the article and the English version of the article gets published at the very same time? Because if not, you're losing time again to make sure that both the versions of the articles are getting published at the same time. And that's lost opportunity. If you're waiting, months together to make sure that the two versions are actually in sync and they're edited and they are available to publish at the same time, that's actually a lot of time that is wasted. So this is actually the collaboration that happened between Medwave and Creadox. Is that the problem statement was, how do you make sure that you create a technological solution to this problem, a workflow solution to this problem, and integrating and using AI and other technologies to make sure that both the versions of the article are published, in one shot, right? So if you can move to the next slide, Robin. So Vivian, if you want to talk through the process that we had actually come
Right.
up with.
Yeah, so our guiding principle was that authors and researchers should be able to participate in the scientific ecosystem, the research ecosystem, which is so broad and varied, as it were, as God put them on this planet, I mean, if you're born in Chile, or if you're born in Colombia, or if you're born in India, you will pick up the language naturally. And if you're born in Luxembourg, of course, you'll speak more languages, but that's not the reality everywhere. So preferentially, people should be able to develop themselves professionally and scientifically how they feel most comfortable. In our region, Spanish is broadly spoken, Portuguese in Brazil, but only in Brazil. So, researchers, academics are comfortable talking, presenting in Spanish. Maybe they'll be able to read in English, but they're certainly not comfortable writing in English. And research should not be conducted in a language that is not locally appropriate. So it has to be geographically situated. Just, to make things very clear, if you're doing, say, qualitative research vis-a-vis quantitative research, if you do qualitative research, as the nursery is very strong on that study design, it has to be in the local language. You're not going to go out and speak to the participants in English or translate the transcriptions of, ethnography research into another language. You have to publish it in the original language in which these are the raw data. The raw data is actually in Spanish, and it was picked up in Spanish. You also have to feel comfortable in writing out your manuscript in your own language and being able to submit it and have it peer reviewed in your own language by peer reviewers who understand your own language. So tapping into the broad pool of people who really want to participate in this ecosystem without being left out because they don't know English, and they're only getting called by English-speaking journals. So, we did this, but then we said, okay, this is all very well, but you have locally situated knowledge creation and science pertinent to the region, but some of this can be generalizable to other regions as well, especially in other parts of the world that are more or less similar to ours economically, socioeconomically, what have you. So if you want your research to actually be more impactful and be disseminated broadly, and as our universities are also part of the world global ecosystem of, competitive kind of ranking systems, right? You need to reach out, and you can only do that in the common language, which is English. So, I mean, this is a no-brainer. You have to publish bilingual.
Yeah, so in the technology platform in Creadox, in collaboration with Medwave, we created a workflow that would keep majority of the peer review process in Spanish all the way until a decision is made. So the peer review is done in Spanish, which basically means that you're now opening up, as Vivian mentioned, a huge pool of peer reviewers who are now available, because you're no longer looking for only English-speaking peer reviewers, right? So science is peer reviewed in the local language. And if there is a revision that is requested, it is again coming in as the Spanish version. So all of this peer review process is actually kept in the local native language. If you can move on to the next slide, Romy. Once the author has submitted the revised manuscript and it is peer reviewed and the editor accepts the Spanish, so all the decision, until the decision is made, it is kept in the local language. Then it is sent into the production cycle, where at that point of time, you're saying, okay, now I'm ready to actually translate the workflow, right? And since all of this workflow is actually done on a technical platform, when the author receives, after the translation, they receive both the manuscripts, the Spanish manuscript as well as the English manuscript, and they're able to look at both of them in one shot. And then the XML conversion happens automatically by the platform, because this is a full XML based technical platform. And so the publishing of both of these articles happens at one shot. So earlier, was it like 30 days, Vivian?
Yeah,
You
we used to have,
publish?
right, because we copy edit the Spanish version extensively because of our reality, okay? And also to make it in extensively to a certain point. Of course, we don't change the ideas, you know, but we maybe will make phrases shorter so as to facilitate the translation that comes downstream, right? So we would publish the Spanish version and then send out this final version to translation externally, internally. The authors would provide, then we would copy edit that one, and that was just a big hassle. So what we do now is that we copy edit the Spanish version, have it proof approved by the authors. That goes back into the system, then or it's in the system, and it's picked up by the English language medical editor. So this is a person that has two people actually based in Argentina who have the combined expertise of advanced English and medical training. They're both doctors, right? Junior doctors, but doctors. So they pick up the Spanish already proof, you know, and everything is perfect there version. They will translate it using AI tools and then put it back into the system. The CreaDocs recycles large portions of the manuscript that do not need translating, such as references, metadata, and a whole bunch of stuff like that. The abstracts always come in, title always comes in the two languages. And then the technical English editor sends it back, sends the proof to the authors. So the authors are also checking on the English version. And then, and this is a very key point, which is the translator review, right? The translator review, since he, in this case, it's two guys, okay, doctors, colleagues, they check the Spanish version. They do a consistency check. So they do another technical check to ensure full consistency and absence of errors, you know, or of any kind in tables, numbers, you know. There's so many points where errors can appear. So when this is really released for publication, it has gone through a very major consistency check between both versions, and they're published simultaneously on the same day, same hour. And so it's perfect, and we have no lead time between one version and the other. All of this is deposited in Medline under a single DOI. So we don't have a DOI for one language and a DOI for another language. We've always done this even before in the olden times, you know, in 2014, when we were doing all of this very manually, we always had a single DOI. And I think that's also very important.
There was a question about this actually, which you've just answered, and how that impacts citation. So I assume citations
Right.
for either the Spanish or the English will be counted as one.
Yeah, the only problem that we've found is in Google Academic that tends to index through the URL and not DOI. So you might find like citations to the Spanish version, citations to the English version, but anything that is WAS related, Scopus related, Medline related, it's a single DOI. And that's what the academics are actually interested in, right? Yeah. Samya?
Right. So the final deliverables, as Vivian said, it's all automatically handled by the system. It converts it into a full JATS XML. Both the Spanish and the English version comes out at the same time. So this allows you to simultaneously publish both versions, right? So if you can go to the next slide, I think we've captured, I think the key points here are the simultaneous publication, but also the bigger, more diverse reviewer pool, because I think that's always a challenge to find the right peer reviewers. And the authors have that ability to see both the versions at the same time. So they have that, they're very, comfortable that both the Spanish and English versions are like looking at it. And at the end of the day, we are using technologies like AI and making sure that, technology is brought in. So there is no additional, not a huge expense in terms of, publishing this together. So I think this is one way in which Even a small journal like Medwave has been able to offer a world-class translation service to their authors and make sure that through this innovation they are publishing it together.
Yeah, I'd like to just say two things regarding this. First, that we do not charge authors for this translation. It's included in the APC, which is way lower than other journals, but about $1,000, so to speak, just for the whole process. That's our APC, more or less. And the second thing that I'd like to point out is that we've had a consistent, relatively good impact factor. I mean, for our region, 1.2, we are we're not in the core collection, we're in the emerging collection of WAS. But now everybody got the impact factor, so it doesn't matter. And we are a quartile 2 journal. That is, the denominator for that is all general medical journals, so including Lancet, New England, BMJ, all of those. So that's my denominator. And to become a quartile 2 general medical journal is really something that makes me very proud. And I think that the promise of having this bilingual has actually been fulfilled, which is that we are having also a scientific impact, and the outreach through English is very important.
Excellent. Thanks, Vivian. We're running a bit short of time, so
yeah, I think just we can quickly run through the rest of the slides. So this is just to the entire process, all the way from submission to distribution to the final XML deliveries that are all happening on the technical platform, which means we're not having any other interventions. And again, I think you can skip this. We can go to the next slide. We already spoke about this.
Yeah, I think we've covered pretty much all of the bases.
Yeah.
There's one last slide on, yeah, exactly. What we can show to the rest of the world. Soumya, I'll leave that to you.
Yeah, I think this is actually a very interesting collaboration. I'm very proud of this particular collaboration between Medwave and Creadox, because I think we took a real problem that is out there in the field and used technology to actually solve it, and we've been able to make a significant impact through that. And I think that's probably what Avi was also talking about, is that publishers, if we just kind of come together and figure out how to move the needle on making sure that we support multilingualism, I think there's a lot that can be done. I think it's just a matter of making the first move. I think I really like this concept of localism, which you have to stay local, but also make sure that science is going global, and what are the things that you can do in an agile manner, keep innovating to get your science to the rest of the world.
It's really having the best of both worlds, isn't it? Doing it simultaneously.
Yeah. Right.
And
like you were talking about, Romy, I just want to point out that Vivian is probably the one on the furthest west on today's webinar. I'm on the furthest east, and if the two of us were able to collaborate, I think what more, what other examples do you need for collaboration?
Yeah, exactly. We do have one more question before I hand over to Metin for his slot. Is a question about whether this simultaneous publishing is a common practice in journals in your area, Vivian, or is this unique to Medwave?
Oh, I'd say it's unique. What most journals are doing, either they publish only in Spanish, or some of them have opened up to receiving submissions in English and publishing in English. So my journal also receives submissions in English, and we would not translate into Spanish in that case. But these other journals that are receiving these submissions in 2 languages, or maybe 3, I don't know about Brazilian journals, they will publish them only in that single language. So if you receive a submission in Spanish, it comes out in Spanish, and that's the end of story. So that's as far as it's gotten. And I think the issue here, the problem that is solved, is how you make the Chinese research available to the rest of the world in English. So in our case, it would be the Spanish research. So it is not a reality, and I think it should become one, but it does entail some expense and some devotion to the concept of multilingualism.
Yeah. And I think
I hope to see this coming up in Europe. I mean, Europe is like the best place for this.
I think that's a perfect segue to head to Istanbul, have Metin because we're heading from bilingual to really multilingual, that kind of location, border Europe and Asia.
Yeah, well,
over to you.
trilingual in some case. Thank you very much, Romy, for introducing me. Well, thanks for all of speakers. It was very helpful information from my end as well. Well, Istanbul University is the oldest and the largest university in Turkey. It's a base for academy in Turkey. So we are a good example of the field itself. As a first publication from the press itself is 1914. And now we are 70 journals and publishing about 100 books per year. The language-wise proportion of the journal is 1/3 in English only. The rest are bilingual or trilingual, I should say. Double-blind peer review, multi-language, and it's compulsory for our end, ethics checks and reports, title, abstracts, and keywords in English. And also, if the English full text is not provided, we ask them to provide extended abstract in English, in addition. Yep. In our operation, we're trying to use the high tech as much as possible now, because life is much easier. Operations are much easier when you get use of these technologies. So the technology-wise, I want to emphasize, and the weakest chain in the publishing operations is the peer reviewing. On the peer reviewing side, we need to generate a comfort, the comfort for peer reviewers. It's not easy work for their end, as well as on our end, everybody's end. So using high tech regarding the ethics check, language quality check, analytical checks, and referencing qualities. So we don't want to let any duties to reviewers to check on these items. Whenever we publish, we just transfer the potential article to the reviewer side. We also accompany with these reports to him, so he's not worrying about those kinds of checks, making life easier for them. Yep. The current system we are using is in-house developed Istanbul University Press Management System. It's multi-language, multilingual platform. Reviewer sites as well as author site, and also manager point of access is multi-language designed, I should say. Some of them have been, how I should say, automatic translated by Google Translate technology, but the side English, German, and Arabic parts are not automatically translated. We are translating it into the system, and all end users are using it from their interfaces. So I think this is the last slide from my end. So I am shifting the word to you, Romy. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I have one immediate question, because I think this leads us to one of the topics I wanted to get into, is this author experience. If we're moving away from the publishing your content in different language, but the experience of interacting with different systems and platforms. And you said that for most of the language you're using Google Translate on the interface, but for the rest, for 3 of them, you're doing the translation yourself, so you're doing the updates. How much work is this to stay on top of it? Is this once you translate, it's done? Does it take a lot of continuous work? We're changing a button and then you have to translate it in all the languages.
Well, how easy? Well, the translation part is one time only, actually.
Mm-hmm.
The reports, you just translate them. The interfaces, you just translate them. And plenty of items are repeated in the system. So translation part, the human translated part, is not that much of work. But, the Google Translate is working better and better day by day, I should say. It's so fast in development now. When compared to a year ago, now it is something very different, very developed, I should say. So it tends from our end to trust on Google Translate more than our Translate in some cases.
Okay, wow.
Which is interesting to see. But the AI, the infrastructure comes from AI. You know, the AI is a self-generative AI as well as human generated AI. But right now it's a combination of both. It's getting better and better. How fast? Unbelievable, really, I should say. So it's not that much difficult, really, to translate as well as trust on Google Translate. Both of these. Yeah.
And what about things like emails that your system sends out? Can the author choose which language to go send it in? Is that customizable, or is it standard in one language and you translate it?
Well, of course, the peer reviewer selection is important in this part because editor decides which language peer reviewer should be selected. When you select the peer reviewer and you select his language, he's able to change it if he wants. If he changes the language on his end, the reports, forms, etc., everything changes to the language he has picked up. But if he doesn't really touch it, it will be the language that we have selected, the editor has selected for him.
Right.
That way.
So quite a lot of flexibility.
But the forms are English, German, Arabic, and Turkish only.
Okay.
Not other languages, because you know the form itself is something needs to be done from our end.
Can I pitch in on that? I'm seeing also a comment here regarding DeepL. That's what we use. DeepL is incredible also, and it's also getting better by the day. And then so the medical technical editor picks up the manuscript in Spanish, copy edited manuscript, and then passes it through DeepL, and then uses Grammarly to improve on the DeepL version, plus making the human decisions line by line also on what to accept or what not to accept and what to clarify, what needs further clarification. So there's always a human component in this. But of course, I mean, if you compare having to manually translate a manuscript like it used to be years ago vis-a-vis how it's being done now, I mean, there's just no comparison. In a couple of hours, you get out a beautiful, a high quality product.
Well, just to mention, other than Medway, Vivian's part, we don't translate. We leave the translate to author. We ask author to translate it. We don't want to touch that side, but we do edit. We are doing editing part of it, but no translation, as Istanbul University Press. Just want to mention about it. Yeah.
And does this go for the extended abstract or also the full text?
Yeah, all of it. But the editing part, we do handle editing for them, free of charge, no cost for that.
To go back to that example we had from Avi, I think even if you can't do the full, text translation like Vivian is doing, having an extended abstract in English, surely Avi, going back to the kind of example from the malaria research in Chinese, if at least the abstract had an extended abstract in English, that would have been a way for it to be picked up internationally sooner than 3 years later, right?
There was a really interesting pilot experiment, and I don't know what happened with it, but I know that the Lancet was experimenting with enabling authors to have abstracts, I believe, in up to 6 languages. And it was the author's responsibility, I believe, to pick which languages they wanted and make sure those translations got done. But because it was the abstract, it's not a big lift, it's not a big cost. But what it does is it allows, if a researcher is working with a local population, it allows that to be, the extension, not necessarily to the same degree as Vivian described, but, at least in terms of discoverability. But number 2 is, I think it's great for the publishers, right? Because, there are a lot of practitioners and clinicians that are searching, that just have a natural tendency to search in their own language for materials and information. And just having that abstract might be enough for someone to come across it that may not have come across it otherwise, right? And that's seen in studies of how we search Google, we tend to search in our own language, and we should be starting to show up there. So there's it's a small infrastructure kind of a tweak that we need to do in order to enable that, but I don't think it's too big of a lift from the publisher side.
Yeah, and then you can always use some tool to translate the full text if you find the abstract is relevant, right?
For sure. Yeah. Yeah. And what I wanted to just note here is that and I'm in the translation business, so this is a very important conversation. But when we're talking about localization, it's more than just translation. And one kind of use case which always opens my mind is that of Uber. So Uber actually used localization not only as a way to kind of make things easier for their users, but that was their growth strategy. So what I mean by that is they basically, the way they broke into new markets was asking themselves, okay, what language should we be using here to make people feel comfortable getting into random strangers' cars, right? What color schemes do we want to use? What text does it look like? There's a lot more to localization than just translation. Translation is a great start, right? If you're going to ask me translation or nothing, definitely translate. But there could be, more to it, and there might be, more levels of nuance and sophistication in terms of design elements and user experience elements, which are also going to be relevant for localization.
Yeah. As in certain cultures want more details, like high context, less details, how you look at a website and interact with it. I think there's also how you communicate with the authors. We had the example that we touched on, I think, in our prep call about the WeChat integration to communicate with authors in China. So not just in Chinese, it's not just the language, it goes beyond that, but they're used to communicating in a certain way to make sure we reach those authors.
Yeah, yeah, no, and I think it's even the design elements, right? I think we all go onto a website, and when we come across a website that looks, if you look at, websites from, Japan and China, you can usually, aside from the language, obviously, but even from the design, you can generally tell there's just a different aesthetic to it, which is relevant. So most publishers are not going to have the development team to go all of a sudden go out and each, and develop for each country, but if you can identify, 2 or 3 audiences which are your primary audiences, and try to, or maybe markets that you're trying to break into, and try to do some customization and localization around that, I think that can get you a lot further. I mean, definitely in terms of like, buying power, people, I think, studies have shown people are like 70% more likely to buy something that's in their language. So I don't know if it translates exactly over to, scholarly publishing. Obviously it's a bit different, but I think that's a powerful number that we shouldn't be ignoring.
Yeah. If you have any questions, can you pop them in the Q&A or the chat? I can see that there's a raised hand, but we actually don't let participants speak. So just throw in your questions. Otherwise, we have too much back and forth. Avi, I have a follow-up question to you. Are you aware of any publishers that have changed their design, a platform experience for different areas? Or even the language, like they're allowed to change it, use different language, but specifically the design side?
It's a really good question. I'm trying to rack my brain now and see if I've come across a good example of localization. Maybe there's a reason that I'm pulling from examples of
Maybe
outside
not
of our
publishing.
industry,
Yeah.
right? Because I'm not sure that we, that we've necessarily capitalized on this. I think your example of WeChat is a very good example, right? It's like, especially with publishers chasing, Chinese research, definitely employing your traditional techniques, even doing SEO work via Google is going to be a waste of time, right? Because in large parts of China, Google is inaccessible. So I think it starts with really understanding your local population. But no, I don't know if I've seen a really great use case in our industry.
Can I chip in with a critique here? There's something that in the scholarly publishing industry that really irks me is are these big editorial platforms where all of the journals are standardized into a single format. If you're lucky, maybe your publisher will put different colors to the different journals. Like, look at Science Direct. I mean, it's thousands of journals. All of those journals coming from different parts of the world have all lost their original look and feel when they were publishing in paper. And I think that's a loss to granularity, cultural granularity, and the full rich experience of interacting with whatever you're reading, either it's on paper or on screen. And it really irritates me because I think there should be, I mean, these are big companies that have huge cash flow. I mean, what does it cost to increase the number of templates, and give your journals, the ones you're buying, the ones that are partnering up with you, more options so that that original look and feel doesn't get lost. And I also want to say something that I skipped on, that doing this bilingual thing and keeping also your look and feel um, increases your loyalty, your author loyalty base. And so we have repeat authors now over and over submitting because they like the experience, they like what they're going through. And then at the end of the day, what you have to have is an online community. You have a target audience. It's not like everything is global. That's why we use the term glocalism, which is, you go global, but you start local, and you have a co-construction of global and local. So this standardization and uniformity in colors and sort of watering down the cultural richness of our intellectual production, to me, is like devastating. I don't like that.
That's so
Sorry
interesting.
if I was very negative.
I mean,
but
I've talked a lot in other webinars about author experience and what we tend to have talking those discussions about journal branding versus publisher branding. And I think there's been a general trend to move to kind of the portfolio experience, author experience, and putting it all in one bucket rather than the individual journal experience. And obviously more societies signing with bigger publishers, that is getting lost because you sign on and then you're part of the big publisher experience rather than your small local brand experience of that journal. So that's really, really interesting feedback. We do also have a question in the chat. I don't know if you guys can see it, from Lauren Oppenheim, about can you share any insights, tips, or funny stories regarding applications that use tokens for translated UI content? Avi, I'm looking at you here, but maybe not. If you have any thoughts on that. I don't, unfortunately.
I did read that question. I'm not sure I fully understood it. So maybe if Lauren, you don't mind clarifying a little bit, can try and take a crack at it.
I assume there was someone who used AI to translate, but it's come out wrong. Maybe I misread that.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Obviously, I will say a note of caution that, the same way that, these AI systems can
I have one.
hallucinate from time to time, you do need to be careful that they're not, leading you astray in the wrong direction.
Yeah.
You do need to carefully review, and I think Simon and Vivian gave a good example of the workflow that they built out to make sure that, nothing falls through the cracks. That's obviously critically important.
I have a funny story. I got it. I picked it up. It's the user interface, when you translate the software so with CreaDocs, actually in the first version, but it carried over for a long, long time. The handling editor role was translated by Somia's team as okay, into Spanish, but it was done literally. So if anybody knows Spanish here, it ended up as editor de manejo. And that doesn't exist. It was so funny. Every time we look at it, we say, ha ha ha, So yeah, it is funny. Since this was very much in the back office, it doesn't matter. So, but it was just
what is the correct
cute.
Spanish term?
Editor asistente.
Okay.
Yeah, you can find different versions to that. So associate editor is easy, editor asociado. Okay, that came out fine. But the handling part of the English doesn't translate into Spanish literally. So yeah, there are a lot of funny stories.
That's a good example, yeah. Well, being mindful of time, I know we've touched on quite a lot of different things, different ways to overcome some of the challenges, both full bilingual publishing, translating abstracts, translating part of the UI. Before we wrap up, is there anything else that either of you guys want to add or throw in for people to be aware of that they might consider for their own journals, their own workflows? We've said everything. Brilliant. That's always good. Well, I'll just jump back to the slides really quickly to finish us off. If you haven't downloaded the Author Experience, a beginner's guide that we put together, we have some nice examples and localizations, like the example from Avi's quoted in there, from Uber in there as well. So please head over to the Chronos Hub website to download that. And I'll be at Frankfurt Book Fair and the STM conference next week. And we do have our next webinar confirmed, but sadly didn't make it into the website on time, which is about citation misconduct, helping authors keep their papers clean. And that's in November. I think it's the second week in November. So that should go up on the website shortly. As always, if you want to be kept up to date of newsletter or events list, we usually send an email out the week before the webinars start to be reminded. So please do sign up for that on our website. And thanks so much. Thanks so much for our speakers. Thanks everyone for asking questions, for great presentations and great discussion on this, really exciting topic. If you have any other questions, please drop an email to me and I'll be happy to pass it on to our speakers. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Romy. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you.
Thanks, Romy. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye now.
Bye.